If you want to learn, you have to first listen.
Welcome to episode 22 of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know, a podcast to feed our curious minds. I'm Matt O'Donnell, and I want to know who you are, I want to know what you do, I want to know why the wait times in the TSA area of the New Orleans airport are so bad. Seriously, they only just revamped that airport a few years ago, and I know it's probably much more of a staffing problem, but good Lord, I've heard stories recently, and I just lived through one, and man alive, I want to know why. That's right, Matt O'Donnell wants to know that. I've spent the past 15 years as a professional bass player. That means I've covered a lot of miles and talked with a lot of people. I've found that the person deeply interested in a topic is often more interesting than the topic itself, and the bigger picture is found in the details. That makes for a fantastic excuse to share conversations with people who I think are great. This time on the podcast, I will be talking with electric bass maker Jake Serek. He is the producer and purveyor of Serek Basses, a company previously out of Chicago, Illinois, now out of the Asheville area in North Carolina. I will tell you all kinds of juicy details about that chat coming up in a moment. Just a few housekeeping things on the docket. First of all, in the United States, today, if you are listening to this on release day, is a presidential election day. It's a stressful day for everybody, mostly at least due to the inundation of the campaigns that happen every 4 years for this. They get longer and longer and more ridiculous. But when the day actually happens, it can be a really high anxiety situation, and we just all kind of want it to be over. I have long since ceased trying to use any platform in which a lot of people can see or hear what I say to talk about who I'm voting for and why. That is a much more small-scale discussion environment for me. But what is important is that if you're hearing this and it's election day and you are able to vote, please go do so. Whether you vote for the person I voted for or the person that I did not vote for, I am fully in camp. If you don't vote, you don't get to complain. And that's really all I have to say on that matter. On a much more easy breezy note, I have new music out now. November 1st saw the release of an EP called Flying Blind, and that group name is Boss. That is stylized as BOSS acronym with periods in between, and you can find it everywhere that you stream music now. It's a nice few songs that was recorded with my friends Tim Buell, John Shaw, and Aaron Smith. If we're being honest, it is 4 professional musicians making instrumental music, which sounds really self-indulgent, but I promise you that during the sessions, had I felt as though we were being not tasteful in a great way, that I would have called us out on it. So I think that there's something there for everyone to enjoy. There's a song each written by, I think in this order, Aaron, John, and myself. There's even a bass solo involved in the third track. Oh boy, bass solos. But this record was sort of a proof of concept where we sat down to see if playing this kind of music would work for us. I think it was a great success, if I do say so myself, and I think that the plan is for us to do some more. So, Boss is a whole thing. I feel like for my part, it was facilitated to play on that record very easily, and that was because I was playing basses made by today's guest, Jake Serek. Jake is someone I've wanted to have on the podcast for just about as long as I've been doing it. He's a great guy, and I knew it would be a great talk. I'm a big fan of his work, and he's a really thoughtful creator of instruments. I've been playing his instruments in some form or another since 2017. Around then is when I wanted to get the bass that I was playing full-time off the road because my friend Tim Clunan, who had built it, had passed away very suddenly, and he didn't make a lot of basses, and so it was sort of irreplaceable. He thought very highly of Jake's work, especially as someone else that was doing basses that were a little shorter. So it was kind of a natural progression for me to switch from taking my Callow Hill on the road into buying a Serek and having that be sort of the next thing that was my grab at any cost bass. You'll hear me talk with Jake about the way that I sort of started to see that he was a thing and that sort of endorsement from Tim and stuff like that. That's all in the chat. We kept planning and having to push back the recording of this episode, mostly due to the move of Jake and his wife and the whole operation from Chicago into the Asheville area. The final setback, I suppose, was the hurricane that did so much damage to that area, including some damage in Jake's shop before he was even really able to get up and running, though that has been rectified, and I've seen him out there on Instagram in the past few days doing some work on instruments. But definitely also take that mention as a reminder that there are tons of people who are still hurting in the Western North Carolina area. I have not done adequate research into what organizations are the best to donate to, but if you have a spare few bucks, find an organization that's doing work on the ground and throw those few bucks their way. There are people who, whether they ever learn that it came from you or not, will be thankful and helped by your generosity. This is one of those episodes where there will be a photographic paper trail of some instruments that we're talking about, and on Instagram, you can find the post for this episode and swipe through and see the things that we're talking about, including all 3 of the basses that I have owned. I should mention that only 2 of them are currently in my possession because back in 2018, some asshole stole the first Serek I ever owned out of the bar I was playing in on a Saturday night. If you ever see a Serek bass out there that is left-handed, that has dots along both sides of the neck, that one belongs to me, and I would love to tell the Nashville police that you found it. And with that, I will change tones and bring you to a nice, easy, breezy, wonderful chat with Jake Serek. Out 2 weeks from today, so it'll still be something that we're talking about in general. So why don't you tell me what's going on post hurricane there in Asheville?
Yeah, well, so we just moved here from Chicago about 2 months ago. Made the decision, had been kind of looking to move for a while, get out of the city and everything, and we found a place down here in Brevard, North Carolina. As you are aware, I'm sure there's an awesome music scene here and just beautiful nature and all that. So we were super excited to dig in. And we've got this horse barn on our property that I started renovating to be my new workshop. So it's basically like open horse stalls on the bottom and a hayloft up top. So it's just like an open structure. So I got it all closed in and sealed up and insulated, and was at the point where I was kind of just doing like the finishing touches, getting outlets wired up and getting ready to turn the lights on and everything. And then Helene came through and dropped a 100-foot tall pine tree right down the middle of the barn.
It's unfortunate. I mean, it's super unfortunate, obviously, but there is also something like, I know that you're a pretty like nature forward guy.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you see like nature just do shit like that is also like beautiful even in its destruction, and knowing that you have all this time.
Yeah, the irony of it too is like, everyone's like, oh, why did you move from Chicago to North Carolina? And like one of the things at the top of our list, my wife and I were big nature lovers. We love to hike and bike and kayak and all of that. And so we're like, we want to be closer to nature. And then we got completely bitch slapped by nature. Like, Mother Nature was like, you want some of me? Here you go. But there's the biggest kind of upshot to all this is just like we moved down here to be able to get like dig our heels into like a community.
Yeah.
And we've seen that like in spades down here. Like we became very close with all of our neighbors very quickly throughout this, and just seeing like how the community gets together to lift each other up is really cool. Like day one after the storm, everyone had their chainsaws out and we're all out there cutting trees down. And like,
yeah,
my neighbors, most of our neighbors, like immediate neighbors, are retired, and they're out every day, like helping people rebuild their houses and bring supplies to like the more remote areas that are cut off and stuff. So it's just really cool to see how like everyone just kicks into gear, and like it's the kind of people we want to be around. So it's really cool.
I was here in Nashville in 2010 when the flood happened.
Yeah.
That wiped out like everything. And then also we had the tornado happen immediately before COVID, like a week before everything shut down.
Yeah.
A tornado ripped through like downtown essentially.
Right.
So there was all this destruction and a quarantine, and it like was a compounding thing. I mean, in all actuality, the flood was way worse. There was so much that was terrible, especially for musicians. The rehearsal facility sound check, where a number of bands have their storage lockers, all got flooded.
Oh, that's the worst. That's a horrible feeling.
And there's like a number of things that just got like totally destroyed.
Yeah. Water is not the is definitely the enemy when it comes to instruments and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Hey, how many of your neighbors, are there any of your neighbors that you met for the first time after the hurricane?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like they came up the driveway with the chainsaw and was like, "Hey, I'm Steve. Nice to meet you. How can I help?" Just like,
yeah,
pretty cool, really cool, and instant bonds that way. So yeah,
I mean, that's dope, because if you're there for a long time, you will be bonded that way forever.
Yeah.
With people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a 92-year-old man down the road from us. His name is Papa Joe. He used to be part of a traveling circus. He worked with chimpanzees and gorillas and things that you wouldn't see today in a traveling show. But he's got all these crazy stories.
That's wild.
And he lives by himself down the road here. So we went and checked on him, and he's like, "Oh, I've been through storms before. This was nothing." Like, he's just, a tough guy, and he's out there the next day, like mowing his lawn, like nothing happened. It's just, there's some hardy people out here for sure.
So talk a little bit more about what made you, move from Chicago out that way.
Yeah. So like, as I mentioned, just we wanted sort of to change our lifestyle first and foremost. And being that my wife and I are both self-employed, she's a therapist, and then me with my business, that afforded us a certain amount of flexibility. It's always been, I say always, but like as long as I've been building instruments, I've had this sort of little vision in the back of my mind of like, one day it would be really nice to have my own shop on my own property. For a multitude of reasons. Number one, not to have to deal with like skeezy city landlords who just, jack you over at any chance they get. But also just like the idea of kind of like a more, I don't know, holistic isn't the right word, but like a more all-encompassing life. Like my wife and I are in like a sort of family planning stages of our marriage. And, and so it's like, I would love to be a stay-at-home dad. I would love to be able to raise a kid and work, 10 feet away from the house and be there, and just set up ourselves like that to be just more present for all aspects of life. So that was a big decision. And when we found this property, we just said, hey, let's just go for it. The timing was good as it could have been. And yeah,
that's super cool. Yeah. So let's talk, without being total nerds, about some bass stuff.
Yeah. Let's get right into it. I love that.
Yeah. One, I eagerly await the arrival of my new bass.
I sent it out yesterday. I was hoping to get it out Friday.
Yeah, I saw.
I ran out of bubble wrap of all things.
Really?
Yeah. Well, here's another little story. So I had to get some bubble wrap from Granger up in Asheville, and the Granger warehouse got totally flooded, but they're still like making it work. They're getting supplies out to people, and they called and they're like, "We have your bubble wrap ready. It got covered in honey. I hope but it had plastic wrap on the outside of it, so the bubble wrap didn't get honey on it, just the outside. I hope that's okay." And I'm like, it's totally fine. Like somebody will get a little sweet treat with their instrument. So.
For me, I feel like the first time that I saw anything of yours was the Tim LaFave gray bass.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that seems to be pretty common?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, those were early days for sure.
Yeah.
That was like peak imposter syndrome days for me, where I was like just starting out, felt confident in what I was doing. Like I knew I was building good basses, but I didn't know if anyone else would agree, or, you just don't know until you start getting feedback coming in. And
of course
I'm so, I wouldn't say like I'm not the type of person who really like cares what other people think, but when it comes to this stuff, I do. Like I love interfacing with everyone that I build an instrument for, because it shapes what I do. It gives me new ideas. It's just so yeah, this was really early days. Tim hopped on. I just kind of went out on a limb and reached out to him on Instagram because I saw that he had been leaving some comments and likes on some pictures, and he definitely started a good momentum for us. I mean, it's interesting, like when we talk about artist endorsements and things like that, I get a little hesitant sometimes because like if you think about it, like someone's like, "Oh, you want like Flea playing your bass, like everyone's, thousands of people are going to see it." But it's like the average person who's going to go to an arena and see the Chili Peppers isn't going to care what kind of instruments they're playing, let alone being
a vast minority.
Right. Like, let alone being like, even be able to see the instrument from their 300 section seats or something.
Yeah.
So like, I've always had sort of a different approach with artists, and Tim is a perfect example of somebody who he's like a bass player's bass player. Not a lot of people are going to know his name necessarily from like just a general music listening population, but like artists, other bass players know him, and he is such an integral part of that community and really like talks to everybody that he comes across too. So he's been awesome in that regard.
Yeah. Another great thing about him, I got to meet him a couple of times here because, I had such a good relationship with Tim Clunan from Callow Hill Basses,
right.
And they, and they were super tight. So Clunan had hooked me up, and Tim let me come to a show, or got me tickets to a show once. And also the time before that, it was like too close. And so he just like let me come to sound check, and we got coffee afterward.
Yeah.
But what was funny about the coffee thing was that I was like, oh, like we'll go to this place up the street, like, cause it's just downtown.
Yeah.
And on the way to get to this coffee shop, you have to pass a Starbucks. And he was like, "Whoa, are you taking me to Starbucks?" And I was like, no. And his response was, "Honestly, if you were, I'd have to respect it and just deal."
He's a coffee head for sure.
Yeah, which I am too, and that's why that story is so funny to think of, like the two of us just being at a Starbucks, because that's all I could think of.
Well, I don't want to throw him under the bus, because this was just, he was a victim of circumstance, but I delivered that gray bass, his first bass that we built him, to him while he was eating breakfast at an IHOP. It was the only thing in, to be fair, it's Joliet, Illinois. There's nothing there. So the venue was right across the parking lot. He was just getting some pancakes. And like, I sat down and was like, "Hey, nice to meet you. Here's your bass." He's like, "Cool. I got some pancakes. Do you want some?" Just like, I'm good. This is crazy.
That is sort of one of the things, because I am, my wife is a chef, and I have been a foodie forever. And so like, that is like part of like what predicated us like getting together. But when you're on the road, especially in country music, there's a lot of IHOP and Denny's and
Waffle House.
Waffle House. A lot of those places that are out there where you can sort of predictably know what you're going to get.
Right.
Like chain restaurants, like you're safe.
You're safe.
The same thing with if you're in like a casino in the Dakotas or something, in those instances, you definitely want to get something that comes out of the fryer. Like nothing that came off like the grill. Like
you don't want
you can know.
You don't want the crab leg buffet at the The casino in
No.
Reno.
Yeah, no, not there for sure. But yeah, so what I was bringing that coffee story up with LaFave about, like that, I won't name any names, but we had some like mutual friends, and he was immediately like, when I reminded him of our mutual friends, he was like, "Oh yeah, what do you think about them?" In terms of like musicianship, and I'd be like, "Well, I don't know." And he's like, "Yeah, that's what I think." He's such a no bullshit guy,
Right.
that what I think is difficult about Tim sometimes is that now he gets sent so much gear,
Right.
that I think the average, just internet surfing player sees him talk about something and assumes he's just kind of like fluffing it.
Right.
Whereas like he's definitely only going to say good things about things that he thinks are good.
Absolutely. And like you illustrated, like he will let you know if something isn't, or kindly not in public maybe, but yeah.
Yeah.
He's a trusted.
And perhaps, there's definitely like no dancing around that. So
Right.
that's what's great about that. And so fast forward to when I ordered the first bass that I got from you.
Yeah.
It was like a dual attack of like knowing that he was playing that bass, and then Tim Clunan having seen that bass in person and be like, this thing's really serious.
Yeah.
And then when I was trying to get my Callow Hill off the road around that time, I was like, well, this seems like the right thing. The endorsement wasn't anything to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
But what's funny about that, do you remember the first time that we actually met in person?
Was it? It wasn't. I wanted to say we met at one of the NAMM shows, but I don't think in Nashville. But
it is. That's
right?
exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we had talked, but I was just thinking about like being ballsy because I didn't have a badge. And so I was
That's
like,
right.
Hey, if you can get me a badge,
yeah.
like I'll come and like check your stuff out. Like, and I was 90% sure that I was going to end up buying an instrument, but it was just like, custom instruments cost money as well they should. And so it's like, I can't do it without like putting my hands on one.
Yeah.
So, like if you, it was basically like a blackmail of being like, well, if you can facilitate me putting my hands on one,
it
worked.
One
of those moments that I think to myself as an introvert, I was like, that was really ballsy. Like what a very assertive move.
I'm all for it. And it worked out. And I knew, we've got some mutual love for like the Pumpkins and some other things. So it's a good connection. Yeah. I could tell you were a like-minded individual. I think that was my first NAMM show. It might've been the second one, but that first NAMM show I went to, Summer NAMM in Nashville, I made a huge mistake. My cousin was having his bachelor party in Nashville the same weekend as folks are, want to do. And I was like, yeah, I could do both of those things. I could be part of this bachelor party and then do the NAMM show during the day. By the end of it, I was a zombie. I ended up sleeping in my mom's minivan in the parking garage of the convention center the night before the last day of the show. Because I was out, too late to get back to wherever I was going. And it was like 95 degrees. And I like roll into the last day of the NAMM show, just like sweaty and reeking of booze, probably. So hopefully that wasn't the day we met, but
nothing seemed amiss, but I wouldn't remember either way, but there's part of me that's hoping that it was.
Yeah. Right.
Like that'd be very, very good.
Different times. I couldn't pull that off now.
Yeah. I mean, same. Yeah. Early on in the pandemic, it had been happening for years where I would drink alcohol and like my stomach would just feel like I had swallowed like razor blades.
Yeah.
After like one drink or so, and it wasn't all the time. It was just sometimes. But there was this one time it was like very bad. And I just like looked at my wife when we like got in bed. We were out at a cabin for my birthday with our like COVID pod. And I had like one bourbon and I looked at her and I was like, I think I'm just done with like drinking.
Yeah.
And the only thing I really drink anymore is like good wine.
Yeah.
Because one, great wine doesn't do that to my stomach at all. And it's also about assessing risk.
Yeah.
Like, is drinking this worth potentially feeling very badly?
Right.
And so it's just kind of.
Now we're aging ourselves to the listeners here because it's like we're not going out partying anymore. We're into fine wines. I'm assuming you probably have some binoculars now and you're checking out the local bird scene. I don't know. I mean, I sure am. I certainly am.
Oh yeah, we'll get totally into bird watching.
That's where we're at in life.
There's an artist here who a friend of mine produced her most recent record, but she is like gotten way into bird watching and is now like doing shows with like bird watching societies.
Oh my gosh.
Where she'll like go out on like a day like hike to like see birds, and then there would be a show at night, like coordinated with like
incredible.
local chapters.
I love it.
Yeah.
Got to incorporate those bird songs into her songs too.
It's funny that you said binoculars too. We just went on a cruise to Alaska.
Nice.
And did not get binoculars in advance, and there was no way we were going to pay on ship prices for binoculars. But I think are going to need to go to Alaska again sometime soon for reasons that are not worth going crazy about. Sure. But the next time we will make sure to do that, and so we'll know what we're doing. That's
on the list. I've only been on one cruise before. It was actually the first Kiss cruise. We can circle back to that if you want. But so after that, I'm like, I don't think I ever need to go on a cruise again, even though that was a hell of a lot of fun. But an Alaskan cruise is like the one thing where I'm like, that actually seems like it would be legit, because it's not just about the chocolate fountain and the buffets. It's like there's a lot to see there.
Yeah, and you're not just like in the middle of the ocean in the Caribbean looking at water. Like,
right.
I mean, there's a couple days of that where you're like at sea and really doing it, but then you're just kind of surrounded by everything that you are led to believe that Alaska is.
Right.
It is.
Right.
And it's wonderful. And also like that, we went on a Norwegian cruise and they take you through Glacier Bay National Park.
Yeah.
Which is really incredible, but I don't know how else you would get there. Right. Because like what they do is they bring a park ranger from the national park. They have a few of them like on the ship, and they have one do like a PA voiceover for the whole time you're there and be like, like tour guiding it. And she pointed out that that's like if you're in that one part where they took us with that glacier, you are like double as far from like a road as you could be anywhere in the lower 48.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Like it's something like you're never more, I'm going to screw up these numbers, but it's something like in the contiguous US, you're only ever going to be like 220 miles away from a road.
In the most remote place,
Yeah. Where we were was like 400 miles like from a road.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so like, and she pointed out, she's like, this is the most remote place most of you will ever visit. But it's like, I don't know how else you would get into that part of the world without being on a boat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's just no way to get there otherwise. So that's definitely what made it worthwhile.
Nice.
Yeah. So tell me about how you got into making basses, making instruments, and how you came to be one of the respected people.
Yeah. I would say like really started off as a bass player. That's where I, got my introduction to the instrument. That would have been high school, doing jazz band and marching band and all that kind of fun stuff. Seems to be like a pretty popular route to play trumpet first and then bass. Flea, John Entwistle, like horn players into bass players. I don't know what the connection is there, but that's where I was. Immediately was like, maybe this is just a bass player thing in general, but like was always a gearhead. Like from day one, like got my first bass. It was a red, like a trans red glossy Schecter stiletto 4-string, active EMG pickups, gold hardware, just like honestly a very ugly instrument looking back at it. Don't know why I do know why I was drawn to it, because the Guitar Center employee who ended up selling it to me picked it up and like slapped for me. And I was just like, yeah, that's what I want.
That's it.
I was just talking with Kevin Scott about this. Like we both were like, did you like, start off like really like getting into slap bass and thinking like, this is going to be great. I can't wait to like bust this out, only to learn that you're never, ever going to use slap bass like in your 100%. Career. Like, it's just not a very, tasteful thing in most applications, but that was my introduction. And then, but from there I quickly started like exploring all sorts of different instruments. I remember getting like a cheap I think it was a Jay Terser violin, like Hofner style violin bass, got into like the Paul McCartney thing. So it was always just like very like, what does this do? What does this pickup sound like? Why does this bass sound different? Et cetera. And then got into modifying and Frankensteining and buying parts and putting stuff together. So that was always in the background. Fast forward, did some touring with some bands, got like a good amount of road experience, which was also useful in just like hearing how an instrument sounds, not just in your own bedroom, but like out on big stages and in the real world. Also very valuable experience. Came back from all of that, kind of like over the touring lifestyle, way too much of a homebody for that kind of thing. And I got some internship experience at Lakeland in Chicago. So
cool.
Yeah, didn't do like a ton. I built my first proper instrument from scratch there under the tutelage of Kevin Caton, who was the shop supervisor there at the time. And then later on, he and I actually shared our first wood shop together. He now lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Look up Caton Guitars, Caton. He makes like the most ridiculous acoustic guitars I've ever seen.
I feel like I've definitely heard of that.
They're insane.
It's funny that, I mean, a few things to bring up, like, I am so not a gearhead.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's like a combination stew of a few different things. Like, I'm not a gearhead, but I also, say to players all the time, I hate being left-handed or playing left-handed because it limits the availability of instruments out there that I can just, grab.
Right.
But also I don't get to impulse buy.
Yeah. No, that is a strength.
Like everything has to be calculated. And so it's like good for me.
Yeah. And I would say there's different types of gearheads out there too. Like there's people who like really get into the minutia of tone and like the effect of the mass of this bridge versus that bridge. Like I don't go
right.
I would say I'm more about like the overall, like the macro the feel of an instrument, the tone, but then also just how it presents itself aesthetically and everything. So yeah, Lakeland, and then worked at a repair shop for a while, Third Coast Guitars in Chicago, which that was, I would say, if anyone, like people ask, how do you get started? What's the best way in? Go work at a repair shop for like 2 years, and just like the amount of different types of instruments that are going to come across your bench, you're going to get such an education that way. And just like having to figure out how to set up these instruments when like they probably should have never been built in the first place in a lot of cases, it's definitely like just a huge advantage. So I did that for a while, and then finally, I also had some carpentry experience working like kitchen cabinetry and things like that. So I had some like kind of hard and fast, just like woodworking experience. I took wood shop class in my senior year of high school and built a futon. It was like my first proper woodworking project. I actually, as sort of an homage to that, I kept there's like the two pieces. I kept like the seat piece, and that's my setup bench. I bring that around.
Oh, yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
So there's kind of, a little history there, but yeah. So it all just clicked though, like the playing side of things. And then having been sort of like a collector and owned dozens of different instruments throughout the years, got to a point where I sort of like solidified a vision of like, I love these instruments. I don't necessarily love these. There's something in the middle that's kind of missing. Maybe I can like plug in there and just like fill in a niche thing. And then the short scale thing kind of came along. That was just an accident. I found an Epiphone Newport bass at a shop and I fell in love with it. Just like started building a couple of short scales as an experiment, and then going back to like talking about getting customer feedback, that just got reflected back to me, and that's what people kept asking for. So that wasn't even necessarily like a conscious decision at first, but fell into a really good thing with the short scale market as well.
Yeah, I always say to people, because I mean, I like playing shorts because I just don't have big hands, to like spread out. I mean, I used to play I guess I used to have a Federa, and I was trying to remember if it was 35 inch or 34 inch, but it was 34.
Yeah.
When we were doing a lot of like 35 and a quarter inch scale length instruments, which for the average listener is longer than, even a Fender bass, which is what I was going to bring up in a second. But like that inch and a quarter feels like forever.
It does. Yeah.
Like
it can.
The fretless bass I have is 35 and a quarter. And it's like, it feels like a mile.
Right. And there's more than just scale length to that too, because if you look at a lot of instruments, the ergonomics and the design aren't always built for like a good reach. Like even full scale instruments, sometimes the bridge is still shifted pretty far into the body towards the neck direction, which kicks the neck out, which gives like that first fret reach. Like you're almost like straight arming it. So I paid a lot of attention to that too throughout the years of working at the repair shop, and just like realized like we can kind of like scrunch things up a little bit and not make things feel cramped, but just like feel more manageable. Even like our full scale instruments, like if you put the Armitage, for example, which is like my take on a P bass, if you put a Armitage and a P bass side by side, the Armitage is like 4 inches shorter than a P bass. A lot of that's, you know, a couple inches of the headstock, but also we just like kind of compactify it so it still doesn't feel very cumbersome and lumbery. But I love P basses. That's still the gold standard, so I'm not knocking them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I live in Nashville. It's the P-bass capital of the world.
Exactly.
Which is great. I mean, I love them too. There is something, I mean, the Fender bass, a good one, may be the perfect bass, you know, but what I was going to say that I remind people of all the time is that in the 60s, or a great deal of the 60s, Fender was like the only company making a 34-inch bass. Everything else was short, you know? And so there's just so many things that we still hold up as gold standards of bass playing that when you hear those recorded sounds, they're on short scale basses.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And so that is music that I love. And ultimately, you know, so much of what I do is ripped off of 60s people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it only makes sense that like the way that I am approaching the bass from what I have heard, the people that I like the most doing it would lead me to having that sound, you know, that reaction, the way that a string is like that.
Yep, absolutely. And the short scale thing is definitely a secret weapon.
Hey, real, like,
oh yeah.
Before, I just don't want to forget to ask this. In your designs of basses, how often do people ask you if the basses are Rickenbackers based on the headstock?
I'd say not as much based on the headstock as just like the Sacramento is the closest thing, you know, and I think people definitely see that. But I actually, my first winter NAMM show in Anaheim, I displayed at the Reverb booth, Reverb being a local Chicago company at the time. The Rickenbacker booth was right across the aisle. And I had sort of had some back and forth with them just as like a customer and just other, you know, kind of other things. But one of the reps came over to me and I was kind of like sweating bullets because I was just, Rickenbacker has a notorious reputation for just clamping down on their trademark, and, you know, and rightfully so. They have very unique designs and they're still a fairly small family owned company and they want to protect what they have. And the guy came over and he's just like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, we've seen what you're doing. We're cool with it. We like it. Like, good on you, you know, like you're different enough there. And I'm like, oh, I got the blessing, you know?
Yeah. That feels like a mafia situation.
Yeah, totally. I was like, they're going to shut me down. But, a lot of folks who have ordered Sacramentos throughout the years have just said like a lot of the same thing. I'm still like Rickenbacker fanboy number one. I have 3 of them still, and they're still some of my favorite instruments, the 4000 series specifically. But they do have their shortcomings. They're usually a little bit heavy. The neck thicknesses from year to year are all over the place. I like the real like thin flat ones. Obviously the heel being sharp with binding and everything. The awkward metal surround, sometimes that can be problematic for different playing styles. So like the Sacramento like kind of answered some of those, you know, I don't want to say like fixed those issues, but it just changed the thing a little bit. So a lot of people who love Ricks but like couldn't get over the feel of them.
Sure.
The Sacramento has been a good you know, answer. That doesn't really answer your question. I went off the path there, but
no, that's fine. No, you're totally okay.
The headstock, not as much, because like, but the headstock is certainly very Rickenbacker, you know, influenced as well with the long badge and everything. So that was definitely another big nod to it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, people ask me all the time when I'm like playing gigs.
Really?
People like come up to me and they're like, "Is that a Rickenbacker?" And I'm like, "Nah."
With your left hand, with the 5-string?
Yeah, with the 5-string.
See, that's kind of bizarre to me because other than the headstock, like nothing about that bass. You have the 5-string Midwestern 2, left-handed.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure it's entirely up to the headstock, and they're just like, "Oh, is that some weird Rick?" But no, it happens to me here in town all the time.
That's interesting. Well, fair, and I guess they're short scale, like some of the 3000 series basses, they do have that slightly different like headstock that doesn't have the little crested wave cut out.
I guess so.
So it is a little closer to the Serek headstock. That's funny.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that it's only me that's getting, accosted, that like nobody's like blowing up your DMs about Rick stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't own a Rickenbacker. I would love to get one of the like dot inlay fire glows, basically the McCartney bass.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Beatles freak, but also left-handed. I own a Hofner, which I have the Ignition series, which is the cheaper line.
Yeah.
But that is more McCartney appropriate because it's totally hollow body.
Right.
The modern ones have the tone block down the middle of it now.
Yeah.
But that is not,
Yeah.
I always kind of like threaten to put real like German series pickups in it and like make it real, but like I just never get there. It also sounds great as it is. And
Hofner's done a really good job at the import stuff, or like the sort of budget lines. I feel like those basses were budget basses when they first started out. Now we look back and of course they were all handmade and everything, which is like a rarity today. But at the time, it wasn't exactly like a high end, boutique instrument. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so I would just love to have the other McCartney bass.
Yeah.
Especially when you have flat wounds on a Rickenbacker. It's like instant 1967 Beatles.
Totally. And I'm with you on that 100%. But for me, I'm all like, I came into the Rick camp via Chris Squire. So for me, it's like, I want that to be like as bright and zingy as possible.
Yeah, the total opposite.
Give me the steel round wounds, throw it through, I did experiment with like the Ricco sound early days when I was just really getting crazy with things, and I feel like Ricks play so well with effects because they do have so much more mid-range and like treble. They can really cut through more with different effect pedals. They're not known to be like muddy instruments,
Yeah, for sure.
And so that really launched me into like tonal exploration mode when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, even the flat wound thing, like that's sort of the thing about so much stuff like like Beatles songs like Penny Lane, where it's like that bass is bright as hell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's plunky because it's short, or because it's flat wounds, but it's bright. It's cutting through there.
And we got to talk about the pick. To me, it's kind of, I'm going to say like ridiculous that the pick is still a contested method for playing the bass.
I agree 100%.
I've historically been sort of 50-50. Like I've made a point to try and switch and just like do what the song calls for or whatever feels right for like the lines I'm playing. The older I get, I'm probably more like 80-20. I play with a pick so much more than I used to. And talking like flat wounds and a pick is such a sweet combo. Yeah, especially when you throw some palm muting in there and just I love picks. I love them.
That's the beauty stuff.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite pick?
Oh man, so I like the Dunlop Ultex.
Okay.
They're a little sharp, which doesn't bother me. Like, and also I'm totally one of those guys like where I will flip a pick to a round side.
Absolutely.
And play that way too, especially with something that's like 1.14 millimeters. Like that's a pretty, that's a bass pick.
Yeah.
And so like, it doesn't matter to me to flip it to like one of the short corners if I feel like the one I have is too bright with the sharp end.
Yeah.
There are no rules.
Bobby Vega is a big proponent of that.
Yeah.
I like the Tortex yellows, the 73s, because I like a little bit of flexibility, but those are also really great on the blunt side too. Because you kind of get halfway between like a finger and a pick, because if you're sliding it more along the slope. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a time probably 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, that I really thought like we were all going to be trying to play like Bobby Vega.
Yeah.
He was always there. But once I think some people started covering the way he played with a pick, I was like, oh, that's going to be like the next frontier.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen, which is fine. Like, I don't need to hear a bunch of really bad palm muted pick playing.
Sure.
But I thought that it was going to be like when we all found out about Victor Wooten doing the up and down thumb thing, where it's like, oh, here we go. This is going to be everybody all the time now.
Yeah. I have big toes for thumbs, so that's never going to work for me. I just can't.
Oh, yeah. You're stuck being like a Brothers Johnson slapper.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about wanting to get into having, your own company and what, the dreams for that were early on.
Yeah, that was a little bit of circumstance too. Like I was at the time I was working doing kitchen cabinetry and also still playing in bands on the side, not really doing the touring thing as much, but work was just kind of inconsistent, and I was at a point where I'm like, I'm basically an adult now. I should probably like figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I think I was maybe like 26 or 7 or something like that. I should have been an adult a lot earlier than that, but that's how long it took me. My good friend was my boss at the time, and because work was slow, he's like, if you want to just like use the wood shop in between when we're on like, off days, do your thing. And I'm like, all right, screw it. I'm going to build some basses. From there, I like bought a cheap homemade CNC on Craigslist and started getting some different tools and figuring things out. And yeah, just like figured out, I was like, I think I could make a go at this. So I had my friend Ross, who's a great photographer. Look up Ross Feigery, Feighery, awesome photographer in Chicago. I was like, Ross, I need you to take some like glamour shots of these 3 basses that I've built. They were like, the 3 first proper Serek instruments I'd ever built. I'd built a bunch of crud before that. I'm like, do this for me. I'm going to like put together a Wix website, make it look like I know what I'm doing.
Yep.
And then from there, I like use that as sort of a bargaining chip with like different companies like Hipshot and, get the discounts. Like, hey, Hipshot, I'm a real company. Can I get the wholesale discount? All parts. I need an account. And I started getting that stuff set up, and then went to a couple NAMM shows, met a lot of good artists, met a lot of good industry folks and stuff. And so at that point, I was like, I'm still not making a ton of money, but I'm like, I've got both feet into this thing, so let's just go for it. And eventually was able to hire a couple of employees and just like really ramp things up. And so for the longest time, I've had 4 really great employees throughout the years. And Norm, Atticus, Benny, and Zach, and they all contributed in their own ways too to sort of like the lineage of the company and different design elements and pickups and things, because we make our own pickups and all of that.
Yeah.
But it got to a point over the last few years where it felt a little uncomfortable for me. We were still a very small company putting out a couple hundred instruments a year with 3 guys working full time. But I never set out to be like a business owner or a manager or a production manager.
Yeah.
Like I set out to just be a builder and a craftsman, so to speak. I don't like the term luthier. People throw that one around a little too willy-nilly. So
why don't you like it?
It's like, look, if you're like making violins and hand carving scrolls and all like doing hand carving purflings and all that, you're a luthier. If you're making a solid body electric instrument and you're using power tools, you're a builder, you're a craftsman, fine. But like, let's reserve that for like the next level, because there's levels to this thing,
Yeah, of course.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I wanted to get back to being more connected to the building process. And that was also part of the decision to move out here and just really get back into it one-on-one. And I would be like waking up and just like my job consisted of answering emails, ordering parts, checking on inventory, shipping, printing shipping labels. And I was just like, I don't like even touch a piece of wood 3 days out of the week. And I think a lot of people would be like, that sounds great. Like you've made it, like you're not doing, you've got people doing the work for you. And I'm like, that's not what I'm about. Like I want to be getting my hands dirty and everything. So it's been a counterintuitive move.
Did you ever think about flipping it and getting someone else to do those kinds of things? And then like you be in, doing wood stuff?
Like selling the business basically?
No, more like instead of having employees that were working on basses, have like people that were working on like doing stock, like if you had like flipped roles.
Right. You know, that did sort of come across my mind at one point, and I was looking into sort of hiring almost like an operations manager to just like handle that stuff.
Yeah.
But part of it is I'm micromanaging, not a total control freak, but I also like one of my favorite parts of the job is answering the emails and like having all the relationships. Like that's such a huge part of it for me. Like the bass community is a strong community, and it's a relatively, small world. And so just like I would have issues trusting someone else to put the same level of like care into that side of things, I guess. I don't know. That might make me an asshole.
Yeah, sure.
But that's part of it for me. Is
no,
just like,
I don't think so.
Since each instrument is essentially like customized to the person we're building for, it's important to me to like understand where that person is coming from and why they've chosen to build this instrument that way, rather than just like getting the worksheet, doing the work, and then being, going home for the day. So I like the whole 360 deal.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I was just curious. I mean, I get to spend some time around some business authors, and like, not that I think that I am equipped to do the kinds of things that, or think the way that business authors think about business, but you just, sometimes I get sparked when people say things like, you felt stuck doing that and not touching wood, and it just made me wonder, like, if you had, tried to change it around. But also that's great for you that you are committed to standards, or and stuff like that, and so that you thought that would be bad. Like, that is admirable in its totally own way.
Yeah. I think there's a psychological component to it as well. I remember early on, I was very keen to reach out to other experienced builders and just get their story and like figure out their sort of origin stories and all of that. Actually, Tim Clunan was one of those. I never got to meet him in person, unfortunately, but we did speak on the phone and exchanged some emails. And like, I was kind of noticing a pattern of a lot of smaller builders coming across to me like very jaded and bitter and burnt out.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. Either one, like they felt like they were being misunderstood because like I'm building these incredible instruments, but nobody is buying them, or they're not buying enough of them, or the production got away from them and they're like, I'm so busy, I don't have a life outside of this, and I just work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week to keep this thing going, and I still don't feel like I'm making enough money and whatever. So like I was like, I don't want to end up that way. And I'm 8 to 10 years into this thing now. I don't want to become bitter and like not like my job, but I also don't want my job to define me and dictate the rest of my life. That's part of it too, is just finding this balance of like, I want to work hard, but I also want to have my free time, but I also, and I want to enjoy what I do and enjoy working with the people that I get to work with. So,
yeah, I feel like maybe you got in at the right time of like talking to those other builders and understanding that thing, like that you maybe get to be in like a new generation of people that understand like a happiness balance.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah.
That the builders like that couldn't have gotten through. I've known some builders, and that's for sure. They, not only are they bitter, they tend to be very territorial as well.
Yeah.
Which that was one of the things about Tim Clunan that was really great, was he was always like, yeah, I don't want to do this because like somebody else is doing it, but in like a gracious way. He didn't want to like be taking somebody else's, not even taking somebody else's designs, but more being like, well, I don't want to do that. Like somebody else is already doing that. Like, let me figure out how to carve this like niche, which, consciously or not, I think is something that you have done very well, is like finding, sort of putting out product. Cause I think that, for a long time now, I mean, the first bass I ordered from you was in 2017. And so, I feel like I hate to use the word brand for something like this, but just the way that your stuff presents has been consistent throughout time, and so like you have sort of just like set up, not to go all NAMM, but like set up a booth and let it like come to you for people that are like looking for that thing, rather than trying to like figure out like what's gonna sell or things like that, like thinking of it too that way.
I appreciate that's been your perception, because I have my own ideas, but I'm not so hard headed that I'm not open to the customer feedback relationship, and that's like 5-string basses. That's not something I really wanted to do early on.
Yeah.
But I had, Drew Felder was like one of the first ones, was like, hey, can I just get one of these but with an extra string, and just kind of things like that. So I think that's really important, to also just be open to what's coming back your way. Oh, I was going to say that, like, all my experience being in bands and like making music and making recorded music growing up and everything, the one piece of advice that always came back to me was finding a voice.
Yeah.
I don't know why I keep thinking about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, because by no means are they like one of my favorite bands at all. But there's a running joke in my friend group that was like, like a Chili Peppers song will come on the radio and you're like, oh, what band is this? Like, as if as if anybody wouldn't know. But that just speaks to like that band found their voice, and it's like you cannot not know a Chili Peppers song.
Yeah.
And I think I like applied that same logic to like the business, where it's like I want there to be a consistency in that regard, where it's like, this is coming from Serek, like we have a voice, so to speak, in that way.
Okay, so like, you got the company going and that kind of stuff. A thing that I'm curious to ask you about, just in terms of function, is how do you see the philosophy as a builder that is making instruments that cost, no matter how you try and justify it, a lot of money?
Right.
Like they're always that. And so like, just sometimes when I tell people what does a custom instrument cost, and the average person, and obviously this is the same way in any industry, once you're talking to someone that doesn't know what's going on, they go, oh God. And so I was curious, like what you think about what an instrument costs and how it's
difficult not to come off defensive when answering that question. And I don't really feel like I have to defend, but I would like to explain where I come from with it. Going back to talking about builders early on, one piece of advice that came back time and time again was don't undercharge, don't undersell yourself, because if you're going to start out really low to try and get people in the door, when you start raising prices, they're going to be like, WTF, what's going on here? Yeah. I still made that mistake. I still charged far too little for instruments when I was first starting out. I think it's hard to, when you're not, in the shop seeing what's happening day to day and seeing what all of these materials that go into it cost, all of the time into it, it's really hard to kind of figure that out, because we're so used to like this like fast consumer culture now, where we can get like incredible pieces of technology for like dirt cheap, but they're not coming from somebody who's working in a small shop doing stuff by hand. They're coming from large factories with machinery, and they can pump out volume. So it's kind of a question of volume is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, sure.
If you can produce a lot of something using a machinery and very like highly repetitive process, you can start to water down the final cost. But when you're talking about small business, everything's a little bit more expensive. You've got the material costs, which unfortunately a lot of that stuff went up a lot after the pandemic. Supply chain issues are still, we're still feeling the effects of that. So everybody, like, that was like a trickle down thing. Like, for example, if I'm buying my pickups, I buy some pickups from like Carrie Nordstrand and Curtis Novak and some other makers. All of their parts got more expensive. So then their pickups become more expensive. So then that cost translates over to me. I have to pay more for their pickup. Therefore, I have to charge more to the customer. So there's that. That's very logical. People don't take into account just like overhead. Like, now I'm a one-man shop. All of the rent and the overhead, so to speak, is on just me. I don't get to like spread that out. But really, it just comes down to like the time, the labor that goes into it. And I think that builders need to sort of defend their own value in that. At the end of the day, you have to put a number. You have to put on like what should Jake Serek's hourly rate be, for the work I do,
for sure.
like anybody else. And then
Yep.
I go in and I try and say, okay, it takes me roughly 12 hours of my time to build this instrument. So that goes in to the cost of that instrument too. So you can buy the off-the-shelf instrument at the big box store and it's still going to be a great instrument. But when you are working with a smaller builder, you're getting that attention to detail, you're getting something unique. And I think ultimately too, like the big value is just having the participation in that process.
Yeah.
Like you get to actually talk with me and say, I want this kind of sound, or can we like move this pickup a half inch towards the bridge? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's see what's going to happen here. Or conversely, if you don't know what you want, I have a a backlog of experience and knowledge, and I can help find the right fit for you as well. So there's like I think of myself sometimes as like a bass tailor that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You threw out a number there.
Yeah.
You said 12 hours. Is that about the amount of like man hours that it takes to like get an instrument out? Or
I threw that off the cuff. That is like,
okay.
So it's sort of an average number depending on the model, but it's hard to really quantify because I build in batches. So like,
sure.
I'll by myself, I'll be building 5 to 10 instruments per month. And, but I'm doing like the same process for one full day. So it's like, I don't know exactly how much of that time went into each instrument, but over the years, having built several dozen of each model, I kind of know like this takes a little bit longer. Binding's going to take me a couple extra hours. If we're going to spray a sunburst finish, like that's not easy to do. That's a couple more hours in the spray booth, things like that. And so you start to sort of see like where you have to add the value and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah. And I think like my philosophy has always been, I'm not in this to abscond with a big pot of gold at the end of the day. Like I want to pay my bills and just like be able to have a comfortable life like anybody else. I also want, on the other side of things, like I don't want to charge tens of thousands of dollars for my instruments and then only have people who ultimately probably aren't going to play them, because we're talking about blues doctors and blues lawyers who are buying these things. Like, I want to be able to still get to the musicians who are in the studio and on the road or just getting started out, and still keep it be like, this is an item of value, but it's not like, I have to take out a mortgage to get it.
You said it before early on, and then you just mentioned it about having been a player and like understanding what is necessary. And that is something I think is super valuable. Like one of the things I talk about a lot is like growing up in Northeast Pennsylvania and having a real kick-ass dad. He would just drive me to shows all the time. He wouldn't even go. He'd like go to Dunkin' Donuts and like do the crossroad while I was at a show.
That's awesome.
It was so early on that I would hear like a bass get sound checked on stage and go, I don't think that sounds good. And but what I wasn't understanding then was how that the way that you want a bass to sound in your bedroom or, like in your living room is not the way that it needs to sound good in a mix, studio or live.
Totally.
Like you like hear the amount of like high end that's on something, or like saturation, like those things are huge parts of like how the bass like fits in to
Absolutely.
that. And so like you talking about having the experience of playing, out in clubs and stuff like that is totally about that. And I think that is like something that just totally gets undervalued.
Totally. And then once you get into that, there's so much more in the signal chain that you have to take into account, your amps and like there's so much more than just the instrument. But it's like, I feel like it's my duty to make an instrument that's like well-rounded and it's going to sound good just like on its own when you plug it in. And then from there you can add your sparkle on top with the other gear. It's kind of like, we had some studio experience. Johnny K, the producer, he was known for doing a lot of like butt rock kind of stuff, like Mudvayne and like that kind of stuff. But he was super cool guy. We got to work with him in Chicago, and his whole thing was always just like, you want to start off with like a good sound. Like if it doesn't sound good, I'm not going to like rely on studio magic to make it sound good. So like, let's get a good sound first. Then we can fuck it up and do whatever we want with it. And that's that's the approach that I take building the instruments too. Like it should just sound good. Then you can take it where you want with technique and gear.
I would go one step further and say that like, if a bass doesn't sound is a weird word to use. It's more feel, but there's sound involved. If it doesn't sound or feel right, not plugged in.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not right.
So the feel side of that, setup like is so overlooked, and that's another reason why you need to go work at a repair shop if you want to know how to build an instrument, because you will start off just doing setups all day long. You're going to be polishing frets, adjusting intonation, filing nut slots, and like if you don't know how to do that, you could build the most beautiful piece of woodworking. It's going to like look amazing, and you're going to pick it up and just be like, this doesn't feel like an instrument. Like it has to play well. I'm astonished, even at like, I'm not going to name any names, but I'm astonished at even like high-end music shops that, you know, we're not talking Guitar Centers and Sam Ash's. We're talking like big kind of like boutique music shops. And I'll go and like pick up something off the wall and I'm like, this is unplayable. Like if you guys are trying to sell these instruments, like set them up first. Like,
yeah, for sure.
There's plenty of people who are just going to be like, wow, that looks awesome. I want it. But like, you know, do your customers a favor and give them a chance at playing it. On the other hand, like I know a lot of people, one of my good buddies who's no longer with us, guitar player named Max, and he had this Stratocaster for years and he never once set it up. Like he would change a string if it broke, but he was not a gear guy by any means. And once I kind of got into building, he was like, hey Jake, can you like do your magic and like set this thing up for me? And I got his guitar and it was like forward bowed like a freaking bow and arrow. Like the pickups were dropped into the body. It was crusty. It was rusty. Like nothing about it was right. And so I like spent the day just like getting this thing back to perfection. And I gave it back to him and we went and we played a show and he like couldn't play it. He's like, what did you like ruined my guitar. And I was like, Max, no, this is how an instrument is supposed to feel. But he had like built up so much hand strength in his left hand. And he was so used to just like wrangling this instrument into submission.
Yeah,
that,
sure.
Like, so there's, you know, I get that like everyone's got their own touch, but still like setup is king.
Yeah, no, I agree. I will be the first person to admit I will let a bass go way too long without a setup.
Yeah.
Like I'll just kind of keep playing. And then, I mean, obviously, especially for tracking stuff, like if you hear stuff start to get weird, then it's like time. But
yeah.
Everything happens so gradually that I kind of just end up being like, oh, this is the way it feels.
Yeah.
And then it gets reset and I go, no, this is how it's supposed to feel.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But definitely sometimes like way too long.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about community and being really into having relationships with people and players and stuff and like understand what they need. I feel like it's like the last 5 years has like really exploded in the amount of your instruments that are out there getting played by very musical bands.
We've been very fortunate with that. How do I like put this? Like, yeah, like we're getting to work with some of my favorite bands and that's just super cool. And I don't exactly know how it happened. I don't want to like, there's definitely some luck involved there. And I think just like, kind of like we were talking about with Tim, like if you get one good influential person, like people are paying attention and then there's sort of like a domino effect to that. And then there's also like a little bit of just like being annoying too. Like I always tell people like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Cause the worst thing that can happen is that they either say like, leave me the F alone, or they just like don't respond, but like nothing bad is going to happen otherwise. Yeah. And so like King Gizzard is a good example. Like there was sort of a little bit of social media interaction there a couple years back. And then I was sitting on the couch late one night and I may have been a little toasty and I was watching some King Gizzard live video on YouTube and I was just like getting upset. I was like, why is Lucas playing this bass? I was being a snob about it and I'm not proud of it, but I like sent King Gizzard a message on Instagram and I was just like, hey, let me build your bass player a better bass. It was kind of an arrogant move on my part. And I like woke up the next morning. I'm like, oh God, what did I do? And they were like, yeah, cool. What are you thinking? So like, sometimes you just have to like take a shot and see if it works out. And I think there's like, I think some builders think like any artist is going to be beneficial, but like there needs to be a mutual admiration for it to really work out. Like Deerhoof is one of my favorite bands of all time. And I think when I went and met them for the first time, that came across. They weren't just like, here's some guy just like trying to sell his wares to us. It's like, here's a fan who like gets what the band is doing, sees that like his bass could be a good fit. And like, then they also luckily liked it too. And there's just like a good mutual thing there. So I've never believed in like giving instruments away for free for that reason too, because usually that just falls flat and you never really see much from that. So I think if you're a builder, think about who you're a fan of, what music you like, and hopefully you can kind of attract that to what you do as well.
Yeah, for sure. I just think that like so many of the bands that have Serek Basses out there that are really visible are just very like musical band. In the quote that I gave you, for the website, that like the black bass, like immediately when I got it, I played it on one gig locally before I like took a touring gig. Yeah. And then so like my second or third gig with it was like out on the road playing songs I had never heard before, because it was just like an emergency sub thing that turned into like 2 years of a gig. Mm-hmm. But I had no hesitation less than a week after like having that bass delivered in taking it out and being like, well, this is the bass that I'm playing now, and that it felt natural and felt like I could be expressive immediately. And it just seems like so many of the artists that are playing the basses are in situations like that where they need to be expressive, and having an instrument that like stands up to that is sort of like the right thing. Like for like King Gizzard, and then also like Kevin Scott too. Like now that, I mean, he's involved in all kinds of shit, but like now like being out with like Government Mule, it's like if you're going to play, I mean, and I know he plays a bunch of other stuff like out on that gig, but it's like, he's a guy who relies on being expressive. And, riding with, he's only playing music where he has to like ride with the direction of the river. And so like having an instrument that, like I said, you can depend on to deliver for you when you're trying to get stuff from your brain out through your fingers is important. And that seems to be like very much the niche in which a lot of your instruments are falling.
I'm glad that that's the way you feel, and that like that seems to have been, we've been taken up that way, because it's important. I kind of view the basses as tools. Like we're just building tools, and it's awesome to see then like what other people are going to go out and do. Like that's the reward, really, is like then getting to go see these things out in the world. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about, like build a well-rounded instrument, but like don't let the instrument get in the way of itself either. Like you don't need too many bells and whistles and things, or like I think like a lot of more sort of, I can't point to any specific examples, but just like a bass that has a lot of active electronics and very specific maybe types of woodworking and stuff, like it like focuses in the bass into a certain tonal niche, and it's like, this is just what this thing is going to do. And that's cool, but like I like to leave things a little more open-ended, where it's like, here's a simple single pickup instrument. You can put some overdrive on it and play it with a pick, or you can do like a really old school thumpy, like, there's just a little more tonal room there, a little bit more of a spectrum with what you can do with it. When talking about taking the bass out on tour so soon, I still get really queasy when we get an instrument into a new artist's hands, and then I see them like go out on the road for the first time. I'm just like, oh God, please don't, like, I don't like hope the neck doesn't like snap in half. It's like totally unreasonable, but I get this like, ugh. With King Gizzard, Lucas, we let him borrow just like a showroom Midwestern that we had. It was a perfectly fine instrument, nothing wrong with it. I just liked to try and keep one around, so when people come through, they can see it.
Of course, yeah.
And he like fell in love with that instrument and was just like, can I just keep this one? And I'm like, yeah, totally fine. I'm like, it hasn't really been set up in a minute. Like it's been hanging on the wall in the shop for a month. Like maybe just have your tech go over it. And he's like, oh, it'll be fine. And then like the next show, the pickup cut out like in the middle of the first song or something. I was just like, no, like he's going to hate me and like never want to play the bass again. But he was totally cool about it. And he's like, these things happen. Like, a wire got knocked loose or something. And he was very gracious about it, but that was like my nightmare come to life. Yeah, the first impression is so important. And like, even, when we were pumping out lots of instruments and I had the multiple employees and everything, I obviously trusted the guys to do their work. Yeah. I was always the final quality control. So if something got through that was problematic, I knew it was still like on me, and, definitely like, took that personally. So yeah, I get that. But we are humans and things happen. It's
of course, yeah.
I think a big part of it too is just like how you pick up after that. Like customer service, it's such a cliched turn of phrase, but like customer service is very important as well.
I mean, the first bass you made for me, you reached out with like such like humble apologies about
the
putting
inlays.
the side dot inlays on the right-handed side.
So,
which, you probably could have never told me, and I would have never noticed, because how often do I look at the other?
I wouldn't have been able to
bass?
sleep at night.
No, of course, but
so Atticus, who worked with me for the longest by far, he is a southpaw.
Yeah,
and it's funny because like we both still struggled with building the left-handed instruments. Like he would be in the setup phase, and he would cut and carve this beautiful nut for the instrument, and then he'd put it on and be like, "It's right-handed." I'm like, "You're left-handed. You should, of all people." And then there's been more than once, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but more than once we have finished an instrument. One time I actually sent it out. This actually started nowadays I send a picture of every instrument before I send it out so that the customer sees it. And if they see anything like that is wrong, they can say something before I sent it out. But I sent this one instrument out, and I get an email like a couple days later. "Hey, the instrument showed up. It's amazing. I can't play it though because it's right-handed and I'm left-handed. I ordered a left-handed bass and we sent them a righty." And I was just like, how did I miss that? Just forgot to like type it in on the invoice, and a couple months later didn't think about it. And then it happened again, like a year later. This time I sent the picture, so the bass didn't leave the shop, but I did. I'm like, I just have a problem, and I don't have a problem with left-handed people. I can't seem to wrap my mind around like, you're a left-handed player and you're listening to this. If you order one from us, like, just check in with me a couple times. Give me like some extra like gentle reminders, like, "Hey, just so you know, you remember I'm left-handed, right?"
Incredible.
It's nothing personal, I promise.
Has Mike Gordon from Fish been like the biggest thing that's happened to you?
I would say that's definitely up there. Him and because like King Gizzard's blowing up right now too. They're all over the place. I think they're still a little more niche, but yeah, like Mike Gordon. I have some friends who are like big time Fish fans. Like we're talking, getting close to like 100+ shows. My cousin actually is one of the OGs. He was at Big Cypress and all the good stuff in the early days. But so like it's been really cool to come back around to that. I've like growing up, they were never really on my radar. Yeah. And now that I'm like really like more connected to that community, it's like, and it's however you feel about the band, that scene, that community is like really cool. It's such a very real thing. And like now that we've worked with Mike for going on probably a little over a year now, like I just see all of like the paraphernalia everywhere. I see like little donut stickers on car. Like I just didn't notice those things before. And I'm like, there's a lot of Fish fans just out there in the world, like just doing their thing. He's been really cool to work with. Like I was a little worried with how sort of like eclectic he can be, and like that he might be high maintenance or like not like a diva, but I was just like, how is this going to go? Because ultimately, like what he requested of us is a little bit more outside of my wheelhouse. Yeah. But as I have been talking about, like I like to be pushed outside of my comfort zone working with other artists and folks. So we've built 5 basses for him. We started off with 2, and those were kind of like, let me see if I like these. He didn't know which model he wanted. So he's like, let me get one of each. Then we changed like the scale length a little bit. Then we changed the pickups and the preamp. So we just like started making these like incremental changes. Yeah. He's very scientific in that way of like change 1 or 2 variables at a time. So like I know what's actually happening as opposed to like blowing it up and starting from scratch. So it's been cool. And with these last 2 5-string Armitage basses we've built him, we've dialed it into where he's very happy, and he's like, this is kind of like where I want to stay. Now he just wants like, different sort of iterations of that bass. It certainly opened up another audience for us, building some more like active 5-string instruments and stuff too, which is cool. So, and I've gotten to go I've gone to like 8 or 9 Fish shows in the last year, which is not something I not exactly my scene, but I've had a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, I have always liked Fish enough, and we'll kind of go through phases where I will listen to them a lot.
Yeah.
I sort of found that it's way easier to get people to not be dismissive when you like help them understand that they're much more of like a prog rock nerd band than they are the kind of like jam band that people don't think that they like.
Totally.
Tell me about how that relationship like kind of got happening, because he was a Modulus guy for so long.
Long time.
Was like one thing,
right?
And a very specific thing for a long time. To switch to something else is kind of like a seismic change.
It's another scary thing too, because people pay attention, like in the Fish community especially. Like they are the type of, like we were talking about Chili Peppers, like no one's paying attention to the instruments on stage. In the Fish community they are. And so Mike is friends with Jonathan Coleman, Friendship Wizard on Instagram.
Oh yeah,
an awesome bass player in Philadelphia who's just we've become fast friends. Have built a couple of instruments for him. He had a 5-string Midwestern 2, very similar to yours, and brought it to a Fish concert backstage with Mike. Mike really dug it and was like, "Hey, can I like pull this thing out during one of the encores?" And ended up bringing it out on stage. And immediately, like all the the subreddits and stuff were like, "What was that? Like, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
So that was like Mike's first introduction. So I have to thank Coleman for that. And then he got in touch and came over to the shop in Chicago when he was in town, however long ago that was. And we kind of dialed in a game plan. Yeah, and it's been interesting to see the different opinions, because at first a lot of people were like, people don't like change.
Of course not.
Which is weird with a band like Fish, who's like always changing and always trying to push the envelope. But again, they do
not that.
But they do have their sound, just like any good band.
Yeah.
They like what Fish sounds like, and Modulus was always a big part of that. And I think Mike was just ready for something different. And the first couple basses, it was kind of like people were like, I don't know, this doesn't sound like what we're used to. And then as we got kind of closer, we like honestly ended up steering closer towards the Modulus sound in as much as you can with a Serek bass.
Sure.
So it was cool to kind of like meet in the middle somewhere, and he's really happy, and now we're seeing a lot of positive feedback from the fan base as well. So
yeah, I can imagine that an active electronics situation was probably a necessary thing there.
Totally.
Like would have been missing from the early stuff.
Yeah. One thing I noticed right away about Mike is that he very much likes to be in control of his sound, to the point where I don't, in the most recent tours, I think he hasn't had this, but when I first met him, he had an iPad on the side of the stage, and he was actually mixing his own bass sound in front of house. Like, and not the gain, not the like overall level, but like the EQ.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not getting enough like, 50 hertz. I'm going to like slide that up right now. And like that kind of stuff. And you could hear it. And it was like, wow, that's pretty trusting of like front of house to let him go at that as well, and not like be like blowing up some speakers. And I think maybe they've reined that in a little bit, but that's a big part of having the active preamp as well. And he's a guy who's going to slap and play with a pick too. And so being able to dial in a little extra frequency somewhere, is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, let's bring it around. So like you're in North Carolina now, and you're doing this by yourself. Are you seeing it as like scaling back the company at all, or is it just a reconfiguration that like,
in a minor way. Like as I mentioned, like Serek has never been a huge company. We're still, small potatoes. But I've always, like I said, I never set out to become like a factory. I always wanted to just be that sort of more boutique, might not be the right word, but for the time being, the focus is, going back to like work-life balance and everything. So for personal reasons, I've just wanted to fly solo for a little bit. That's not to say that'll always be the case. There's tons of talented artists, musicians, woodworkers, like North Carolina, furniture capital, and like lots of great, there's a lot of great, instrument makers out here as well. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that community. But I've just wanted to sort of, what's the word? Restoke my creativity a little bit as well.
Sure.
I don't know if there's necessarily going to be like new models coming down the line, but like a good example is the Metropolis bass that has like, we've been doing the some runs of those with the Alembic pickups. That's actually one of the first basses I designed way back when, but I never felt like it fit quite in line with the rest of the lineup that we had. But I've been treating that bass as sort of like a dealer's choice. So in between production, I'm like, you know what? I feel like using some zebra wood and putting some Alembic pickups in, like I'm going to make a run of these. And so kind of scaling back and giving myself some breathing room allows me to do some of that and like get some of my own creativity out as well. So
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that for you. I mean, I know you said that you guys were, in the like family planning stages, and so like doing that too. I mean, we are too. We're hoping that pans out sometime soon. So,
yeah.
And it's the same thing too, where it's like, I'm happy to take a bunch of like road work and stuff like that, but I try not to go crazy because like it could change at any moment. And like my wife is very busy personal chefing.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm not necessarily going to be like a stay-at-home dad. Like we'll have like some balance of that, but it's also just like, I can't decide that I'm going to change something or go hardcore full-time into something because it's like, well, then neither of us will be around for a child. So like trying to just like, it's like nesting before nesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I get that. Another cliche, but life moves by really quickly. And so it's important to just like grab on and be there
for
when
sure.
I
thought it was funny you said before about how people don't like change, which is true.
Yeah.
The only constant in life is change.
Chaos reigns. That is for sure.
Yeah, it's true.
It is absolutely true.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
My thanks to Jake Serek for taking time to chat with me. My thanks to you for sticking around and listening to another episode of Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. Please be sure to like, rate, subscribe, follow, do all the things. Tell your friends that you can do for the show. I ask every time, I say it in some discombobulated manner like I just did, but please, it is so helpful. Yeah, I said that like I was really stressed about it. I'm not really stressed about it. I just, the more I do the show and I keep repeating that part, I think to myself, I feel like I'm begging because I'm asking repeatedly, even though it's, per episode and not everybody listens to all of every episode or whatever. But if you took the time to listen to it, you're in it with me. You're here, you're on the team. I'm going to send you the membership card. You can find the show on Instagram. That is at Matt O'Donnell Wants to Know. My own account on Instagram is at Matt O'Donnell. Send questions, comments, concerns, and requests for free stickers to mattodonnellwantstoKnow@gmail.com. Hey, if you made it this far, thanks for listening to me talk to a guy that makes instruments that I play. That can be a little inside baseball, but listen, the great Quincy Jones passed away yesterday. And he was known to say that you should be interested and master all the creative fields to understand your role as a musician, if you are one. I realize that this show is not going to always be every topic for every listener, but I am obsessed with trying to do what I do better by observing and enjoying all the other creative work out there that is done by passionate people. This show is about me talking to people who are passionate about what they do, and it fuels my passionateness. So don't ever discount where you might be able to grab something from. Again, if you've made it this far into the episode, I'm sure that you are that person already. Thank you. I appreciate you. I see you. And that's going to do it for this time. Take care of yourselves, and remember, the best answer to a question is usually another question. See ya!